Welcome to Gutsy Talks. I'm Rachel Larson, your host, naturopath and nutritionist, and I'm here to have real, honest conversations that can help you heal your gut, calm your mind, and fall back in love with food. Together with leading health experts, we'll dive into all things gut health and explore the deep connections between your gut and overall well-being, so you can feel empowered to take control of your health and live your best life. If you love all things gut health, follow me for more on Instagram at rachel.larson or head to rachellarson.com.au. Now, let's get into today's episode. Today's guest is Greta Durston, a degree-qualified naturopath and a leading voice in the world of vaginal health. Greta specialises in the vaginal microbiome and is on a mission to empower women and AFABs with a sex ed that they should have received in high school. She's passionate about creating a safe, supportive space where no question is off limits and every person feels seen, heard, and validated. With advanced training in reproductive health, hormonal imbalances, and microbiome science, plus mentorship from some of the biggest names in the field, Greta brings both clinical depth and a refreshingly real approach to care. So welcome to the show, Greta.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited for you to be here. I know that you know that this is a field which is horrendously misunderstood, overlooked, and there's lots of women and AFABs walking around with issues which, quite frankly, have been really poorly managed. And, it's an area which we're still learning about, but there's a lot that we can do. And I think obviously we're going to hear from you how that has played out in a clinical sense, where you're seeing women like, you don't even have that. This is what's going on. So I guess this podcast, I really wanted to bring awareness to this issue of the vaginal microbiome, which is probably not a topic that many people feel too open about talking about.
Yeah. It's commonly one of those things where people will feel a bit embarrassed or shame around it. And so that just leads to a lot of misinformation and Dr. Googling and misdiagnosis as well. And I guess it's important just to remember that the vaginal microbiome is really new too.
Yeah.
It's only really been researched in the last 20 years. So
yeah, I would even that is so true, because like the things that we were learning in our degrees wasn't the vaginal microbiome. Like this is all had to be post-degree learning, because it just wasn't around. And even if it was, if people are learning about it in their degrees, there is still so much more information to come. And the vaginal microbiome, we're going to get into exactly what it looks like and stuff, but the same can be said for even the gut microbiome. Like, our understanding has exploded, and so the things that we have learned, we're actually needing to relearn as well, because it's now not really, it's kind of really different. There's just a lot more complexities that we need to understand. So I guess tell us in the audience, how did you come into this space in this field of women's health and the vaginal microbiome?
Yeah, so I guess my story is a little bit like a lot of people, and probably yourself, having your own issues and then sort of going down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, how do I fix me?
Yeah. So when I was studying naturopathy, I think I was in maybe my second or third year. So I had an understanding of what microbiomes were and, how to treat things a little bit differently and more holistically. And I suffered with recurrent bouts of thrush and BV. It led down to pelvic inflammatory disease. So a lot of inflammation in the pelvic region, lots of pelvic pain. I was having those kind of recurrent infections, but it was never really one thing. So it was often misdiagnosed. Every doctor I went to, oh, it's thrush, caniston, or fluconazole or whatever. And I'd take these things multiple times and just nothing ever really resolved it. I went to a naturopath, and the only thing that they could give me was an oral probiotic. And this used to be something that all naturopaths were given, and I was taught this as well. Put yogurt on a tampon or yogurt on a...
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And that would give you the probiotics for your vagina. So look, there's not no merit to that, but there's not a lot of merit to that. I wouldn't say I use it clinically now, but it was sort of our only tool at the time. So that was sort of what I was working with. And I presented to the emergency room 2 or 3 times with intense pelvic pain. Nothing was done. I was always treated by male doctors. One time I actually went in and I was having incredibly horrendous cramps. And I believe I might have had my period at the time. And they said, oh, it's just your period.
You're like, no.
Like, no, it's not, it's not. And they used to tell me just based off symptoms that I probably had endometriosis.
Mm.
I absolutely don't, but that level of infection in the vaginal microbiome and the inflammation that's associated can absolutely lead to those kinds of symptoms.
Yeah.
It was, yeah, misdiagnosed like crazy. And then the second my partner got some symptoms, he was tested properly with the GP and they found an STI, but it's not a very common one, which we'll probably get into, but it was Mycoplasma genitalium.
Mm.
And I had it for about 3 years and it was
Wow.
misdiagnosed, led to lots of tissue damage, lots of inflammation, and it took a lot of time to rebuild that environment once I was properly treated. So I
Gosh.
sort of made it my mission to understand a bit
Hell
more about,
yeah. Oh
yeah,
yeah, I mean, like that's an awful, like, couple of years of pain and also just knowing there's something wrong with you. And I think like not being taken seriously, especially in that field of women and pain, and even being told it's endometriosis, we know how long it takes for people to get that as a diagnosis. So for that to be the incorrect diagnosis, you can kind of tell, all right, well, my actual issue is probably never going to get diagnosed if I keep going down this path.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Imagine if I went for a laparoscopy and, underwent surgery just to figure it out and it wasn't that at all. So I think there was a really big lack of actually testing the
Yeah.
vagina for more than just thrush and BV,
Yeah.
those typical STIs. And yeah, it was kind of life-changing and blew my mind, and sent me down a bit of a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
I then went on to train with Moira Bradfield. I trained with her a fair bit, and a lot of the knowledge that I have, especially at the beginning, was through her. She's a bit of a pioneer now in that
Yeah.
space. Yeah.
She really is. She's like, there's definitely a few people that spring to mind when I think of, a pioneer in the gut microbiome. And I think of more in the same sense where she is just forging through. She's researching and she's doing things which, literally haven't been done before. So
Exactly.
it's an incredible time to be a practitioner when you've got her like, forging the way to clearly an issue that has not been looked at properly ever before.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess like to set the scene for everybody who is like, okay, we're going to talk about the vaginal microbiome. So like, what is a vaginal microbiome? Because we know from like talking about the gut that we need over 200 species in there. We've had like Dr. Brad Leach on here. We've had Asha talking about the skin microbiome. So we've had people talk about different microbiomes. And I think people are, I guess, open to the idea that not every microbiome on the body is the same.
Mm.
So what is a vaginal microbiome? What is a healthy environment for our vagina?
Yeah, so it is quite unique and it's very, very different to the gut microbiome. It's kind of the opposite. So we want
Mm,
really low diversity. So in the gut, obviously, you want lots of different species. In the vagina, we really only want a few species, less than what you can count on your hand. So
yeah.
it should be lactobacillus dominant. It's not always, but that's kind of the gold standard. And there's a few different types of lactobacillus species as well. The one that we really, really want in there is Lactobacillus crispatus, and that's the one that creates the most protective vaginal microbiome. So
Mm.
if we have the, picture perfect vaginal microbiome, we'd want it dominated with Lactobacillus crispatus. And we can have tiny little amounts of other things. Like it is fairly normal to have a little bit of Candida, to thrush microbe, or a little bit of other microbes here and there. But as long as we've got a really, really healthy percentage of that lactobacillus species, you'll be protected from overgrowths of
Mm.
the other microbes. Then we want a really nice acidic pH as well. So between 3.5 and 4.4, 4.5. So nice and acidic. And that will basically rule out some of those microbes that can thrive in those more alkaline environments. And then just thinking about the way that it feels and smells and looks, it should be fairly neutral odor. They definitely do have a little bit of a smell, a little bit of a tang because we have that lactobacillus species there, and that's going to create a little bit of a acidic environment, which might smell a tiny bit like sour,
Yep.
just a little bit. And then discharge that changes with the cycle, usually clear or a little bit white, but not overly thick.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, I think they're great hallmarks for people to think about. And even though that sounds really simple, obviously we've got into the complexities of these issues. And it's interesting when you're talking about the vaginal microbiome, even though it doesn't have, or ideally doesn't have the 200 plus species that we're wanting for the gut, that there is still that common theme of if you have enough of the good stuff and if you have the right environment, that it can tolerate some of the things that just pop up here and there because microbiomes are complex
Yeah.
moving things. But it is still that thing of if you have the right environment, it can kind of maintain its integrity. So I guess now the next question really is to what does a dysbiotic vaginal microbiome look like? So if we know what it, I guess we want it to look like,
Yeah.
what could it look like? And I guess that is probably going to lead us into factors that would be disruptive to that microbiome.
Yeah, yeah. So the really big ones are the pH, because that is really going to determine what kind of microbes can live there and thrive there and grow colonies and
Mm.
stay. So if we have any lifestyle, dietary, age, different factors that are going to disrupt that pH, then we might be more prone to those opportunistic bacteria and fungi entering the space. We also might see a decrease in the beneficial flora. So, yeah, seeing a decrease in the beneficial flora or a huge increase or decrease in the pH is really going to disrupt things. And they seem like really little things, but they are pretty much the two big hallmarks of keeping a healthy vagina. So then things that might disrupt that, it could be another microbe. So it could be, and we might get into this a bit later, but different types of microbes that I'm looking for mostly is fungal infections like Candida, bacterial vaginosis microbes, which are anaerobic microbes. And the way that I explain this so that people can kind of put it to something logical is
Yep.
anaerobic, no air, so doesn't really like oxygen. So low oxygen environments like your underwear that's not very breathable, things
Yep.
like that. And then there's aerobic microbes, which would commonly come from the gut microbiome. They don't always, but they can be more fecal microbes and they thrive in really high oxygen environments. So they all really need kind of different things. And so that will also point to what factors are creating that environment. Why is it allowed to overgrow?
And that's ultimately it, is like you're wanting to understand what the environment is that has allowed these different, you know, organisms to thrive. Yeah, sorry, what other, I cut you off because I was just like, yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Yeah. And then there's other things, some that we can control and some that we can't. So
Mm.
age is a really big one. So just the way that the vaginal microbiome changes as we age, and I'm talking about just as a AFAB woman, uh, as a child, we have more diversity and we can have a higher pH, and that's very normal. We're growing our colonies of lactobacillus species, so we might be a bit more prone to things like thrush and UTIs as little kids. And then if we've then added things like antibiotics for those UTIs, we're then killing off a bit more of that lactobacillus species.
Mm.
And we might be more prone to dysbiosis as we age. Then when we come into teen years, we have this huge flood of estrogen and progesterone, and all our hormones are kind of coming to life, which can also disrupt, or it can create a really, really healthy microbiome.
Yes.
So the change there is really the estrogen.
Yep.
And estrogen fluctuating can create some fluctuations in the vaginal microbiome. Estrogen will increase your glycogen in the vagina. So you might see this as like the slippery, kind of milky discharge that you get in the vaginal microbiome.
Yep.
That is a really good food for the lactobacillus species. So it's really good if we've got a really good amount of lactobacillus species. But if we're already going into that phase in dysbiosis, then we might actually feed other opportunistic
Right.
infections.
Yep.
So we sort of need to know about what their estrogen status is like, what phase are they in, and then also then going into adulthood and maybe pregnancy, we might have some more hormonal fluctuations. And then obviously coming into like perimenopause and menopause, we'll then go into a more naturally lower estrogen state, where we'll naturally, and it's very normal, we don't need to pathologize it, but it's very normal to then have a higher diversity and a higher pH. You might be more prone to infection,
Mm.
but it's more just about figuring out what we need to do to protect that microbiome in that phase.
Yeah. And I think that's so important, like understanding that, you know, these things, these stages that we go through in life, they will happen
Yeah.
because that is our life stage. And it isn't, as you said, it's not about diagnosing an issue necessarily, but if there are symptoms there, and if it is causing disruption, we're taking that not only their age into account, but their hormones and thinking about ways, I guess, to protect and support that microbiome. Because, when we go, particularly in that peri and menopausal place, like that estrogen isn't going to be anywhere near as close as to what it was when we were in our younger years. So it is about, okay, well, how can we protect them from getting recurrent issues or opening up their increased risk to infection and things like that. So I think it's good to know, just for people to be like, there's nothing wrong with me. This is just something I have to work with, that my body is kind of going through.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's totally normal. And, there's different tools that we have for different life stages. And when we're in that more postmenopausal, especially, it's usually more about the atrophy of the tissue. So the tissue is much more thin and we don't produce as much glycogen. So it's kind of the opposite issue to when we're super hormonally active.
Yeah.
And we actually want to increase that tissue integrity and just support the pH and the balance between the microbes.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us, like, when we are looking at different infections or different issues that we have with our vaginal microbiome, and different diagnoses that people would have, like, I know there's probably heaps. What are they? Mention, like, what are the most common ones? So, like, yeah, because I think people, they always think of thrush. They always think thrush, candida, that's it. But like, what else can be happening in your vaginal microbiome?
Yeah, so the most common ones would be thrush, BV. BV is actually much more common than thrush.
Mm.
The other one that I see commonly, and it's often misdiagnosed as thrush, is aerobic vaginitis. It's fairly new in terms of the research. So I find that a lot of practitioners are aware of it, but not a lot of, like, the listeners might not, that might be a new term for them.
Yeah.
It's basically the same as BV, but it's with aerobic microbes. So the hallmarks of bacterial vaginosis would be an increase in the pH, a decrease in beneficial flora, and then you've got an overgrowth of one or more anaerobic bacteria. So these are things like Gardnerella, Prevotella, Atopobium. People might have seen those before. And then the aerobic vaginitis is the same, but then you have an increase in an aerobic microbe or a couple of aerobic microbes. Some examples of aerobic microbes would be strep. So group B strep is an aerobic microbe. E. coli is one that I see very common, is Enterococcus faecalis as well. So they're more aerobic in nature, and they're a little bit trickier to diagnose and also to treat. So they're sort of the top three. And then I often see the plasmas, or the molecules, we call them, which is like your mycoplasmas and your ureaplasmas as well.
Mm.
Probably the
And
most common.
yeah, and like, so that's still like a ton of different organisms to identify, which aren't currently, I guess, being tested that well. So I want to maybe even just jump to the testing, because I think that's kind of the elephant in the room. Like, how on earth do we get this information? What is it that people like have access to in with their GPs, doing privately? Like, how do we get this information to actually treat properly?
Yeah, this is one of the trickiest things, especially for people who are not seeing a practitioner and they're sort of self-navigating diagnosis. With your GP, you can get a high vaginal swab. Usually they would test for things like your thrush and your BV microbes. They might chuck strep on there, but they don't often test for a lot of other microbes. And I can understand why, because these are free tests that are on the Medicare system.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
unless you're really looking for something specific, they're not going to really add it to that list. If you have a partner who has had maybe ureaplasma or mycoplasma, they might add it on there. I've had some clients who can ask for it, and sometimes they do it, but not all the time. If you're wanting something a bit more comprehensive, then we want to do a full vaginal microbiome test. And then there's a few different ways that we can do that as well. So with the swabs with the GP, they'll either do a culture swab. So that's where they grow the thing on a petri dish and see what grows. Some things culture really well and some things don't. So that's another thing to be mindful of. And then with the more comprehensive testing, they'll either use PCR, where they're looking for a certain microbe and they'll be able to identify how much of that microbe is there and if it is there. And you can get species specific with that as well. Then we've got newer technology, which you might use already in your gut testing, which is the next generation gene sequencing or NGS testing.
Yeah.
For vaginal microbiomes, this isn't available in Australia, but you can order the kits here. So I use a couple of different testing companies. One is Juno Bio.
Mhm.
They send it from the US, you do the test here, and then you send it back. And they give you a really comprehensive report of all of the microbes that could possibly be there. So they're basically looking for every single gene in that in that swab, that is not human.
Mm.
They can identify everything. And I've had some really wacky things come up in those sort of tests where you just wouldn't identify that on a normal doctor's swab or even on a PCR testing.
Wow. I mean, that's kind of where technology needs to be, especially for some people, that finding that extra kind of random thing in there may not be the thing that changes their picture and changes their issue, but for others, that could be that missing link where it's like it never would have been picked up otherwise unless we had that. So it's great to see the technology evolving, and the same is for the gut. Like we look at our tests that we were using 10 years ago and we think, oh my God, like we were looking at like 20 species and like it was just really basic. It's a lot different now. So that can hopefully mean better clinical outcomes, but more targeted treatments and for the right things. Now, when it comes to testing, are there things that affect the accuracy of the test? Like, is there the time of month or when people are in a flare, or like when would be, and I guess like you would be, I'm assuming, and I would be hoping that people, if they've got these issues that are of this complexity, would be working with someone to give them, the specifics as to when to test. But just for people to also be aware of this, to ask their practitioner, like, when is the best time for me to test? Like, when is it?
Yeah, and it really depends on the person for the timing.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of top rule would be if you are symptomatic or if you're getting cyclical symptoms, like some women will get it their symptoms at the start of their period or after their period or during ovulation, or if it's like that for you, then testing at that time. So
Yeah.
you want to know what's going on at that time when you're your most symptomatic.
Mm.
If it's more of an acute infection, testing when they're symptomatic in that acute infection is best. Otherwise, if it's more chronic and they've got low level symptoms all the time, then
Mm.
any time is fine.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily matter around the menstrual cycle unless there's a menstrual cycle link for that person.
Yeah.
But if there is, there's usually a hormonal element as well. So we'd be doing hormones and the vaginal microbiome testing at the same time.
Yeah, and that makes sense because you'd mentioned earlier about estrogen. So, understanding, I guess, again, that more holistic picture rather than, hey, what's happening in this specific area?
Yeah.
We want to understand what are those influencing factors. Now, we've spoken about, I guess, symptoms, and clearly this is still a bit of a taboo area. And if people aren't talking about it, they may not be realizing what is normal or not, or what is a symptom or not. So, can you run through, and I understand that there are different, I guess, issues and different species might have different types of symptoms. But just run us through things that we need to be looking at. But if we're like, I don't know if what I've got is normal, like I think I'm okay, but like, what are signs and symptoms of that something's up?
Yeah, something just to be cautious of, I guess, if something's changed for you. So if something feels really different for you, if your discharge has dramatically changed from how it usually is, that could be it's gotten much more watery. It could be that it's really gushy. It could be that it's gotten super thick and there's lots of it coming out, or in thrush, it might be really chunky. Or it's changed color. So I've had clients with green discharge. I've had clients with
God, what
bright
a
yellow
shock.
discharge. Yeah. So yeah, those different colors as well can kind of tell you something's a little bit off. And then just if it's a different feeling for you, like if you're not, actually, I was going to say if you're not usually itchy, you shouldn't be itchy. So if you are itchy, that could be something.
Noted.
Yeah, itchy, uncomfortable. If you're feeling like you're wearing clothes and you can just feel like something's, irritated down there, or you're unable to wear the tight clothes that you would usually wear, something's off.
Mm.
Other than that, it might be the look of it, might look really red or swollen, or You might just have symptoms sometimes like you're experiencing painful sex, and it's more about the tissue or the irritation.
Mm.
Painful sex can have lots of different,
Yeah, differentials, like
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Could be endometriosis, it could be lots of other things. But if there's something that's really irritating and you're feeling very irritated in the tissue afterwards, it's probably something a little bit off.
I think that's like a good scope of symptoms for people to keep an eye on. And I think like what you said is, unless you've always been that way, looking for changes, in your symptom picture or times of month, then I think, I mean, this it could be a total generalization, but I think, a lot of us are kind of in tune with like different changes in our body,
Yeah.
but we sometimes just don't know what we're looking for to,
Yeah.
and we kind of like, oh, I think it's normal. So I think that's a good thing, just to, I guess, keep in the back of everyone's mind.
Yeah.
With, oh, sorry, oh, you've got to say
Sorry, I
something.
was just going to say, and if you've always been uncomfortable, that might not be normal as well.
Mm,
And it's not always microbial. So if you've always had a really itchy or painful outer vulva, something could be going on there as well. So if that's your normal, it's not necessarily normal.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think back to the gut where, people could have been constipated all their lives. And
Yeah.
then like my normal is that I poo once a week. And I'm like, that's not normal, even though that's your normal. So that can also be, I guess, something where people, it's hard for them to realize, well, what is going on? Is it normal? Like, how would you know any different? I guess like in saying that, is there things like kind of, I guess we spoke about risk factors, but are there things that I guess from our innate microbiome, we talked about the crispardus strain, and that I guess being the preferred type of lactobacillus to have in our vaginal microbiome, but does everybody have that as like their dominant strain? Is it something you can modify, or how does that kind of work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So no, not everyone has that as their dominant strain. There's quite a few people, and especially different ethnicities. So it's
Mm.
more common in Africa and Asian countries to have more dominance of other lactobacillus species, or you can actually be bifidobacterium dominant in the
Just
vaginal
throw that one in there.
crazy. Yeah. Doesn't happen very often, but you can be, and that's going to offer a little bit less protection. So even though it's normal and it's genetic and it's part of you and that's the way you were born or that's the way your microbiome grew, doesn't mean we can't change that.
Mm.
And we can always, there's always things that we can do to swap into that more crispardus dominant microbiome, and that will offer us more protection. So sometimes it just is that your genetics and your ancestry and just the way the cookie crumbles that you've ended up with a microbiome that's not so protective.
Mm.
And then that might be the driving factor of recurrent infections for you. So then what we'd want to be doing is really introducing the crispardus species and helping it to grow and thrive and fostering that environment where it will thrive.
Yeah, to nurture that new species. I was
Yeah.
actually going to say that I've done a test on myself ages ago, and this issue of vaginal dysbiosis and these conditions, I'm fortunate enough, this isn't what drew me into the industry. However, I've seen enough of it and I've got, sisters and friends where like it's here and around, but I did it on myself because I was like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm a Gen CI dominant.
Yeah.
So I guess like for people who, and I guess people be like, well, why would I test if I don't have any symptoms? But if you find out that you are another dominant strain, but you don't have symptoms, is
Yeah.
there anything that we need to worry about?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely depends on what strain it is. So the one that you've just mentioned, Jensenii, that one,
Yes.
it's not necessarily an issue. So it probably doesn't pose a risk for you. I do think if you're, trying to conceive or even going through perimenopause into menopause, and you have the budget to do a bit more of a comprehensive test, it's very useful so that we
Mm.
can see and forecast if there is any kind of risk there.
Yeah.
With the lactobacillus species, most of them are fairly protective. And the reason they're protective is because they produce lactic acid. I mean,
Yeah.
they do other things too, but they produce lactic acid, which keeps the other opportunistic bacteria at bay and reduces the pH. There's one type of lactobacillus species, L. iners,
Mhm.
which has previously been thought to be as protective as the others, but new research is telling us that it's a bit more neutral and can actually be a bit disruptive.
Right.
It produces a different type of lactic acid, so and it's not as protective. So it doesn't have as strong antimicrobial properties, and it doesn't reduce the pH in the same way. So it's useful if you can identify that, and then you know what kinds of risks you might have moving forward if you do get any sort of opportunistic bacteria there.
Mm. So interesting. Like, and this is where, like, as
Very
I said, like,
nuanced.
yeah, like if you were to not have any issues, you'd be like, well, why am I testing it? I just did it because I'm a crazy naturopath that likes to test and
Yeah.
figure out myself. But it's also now I'm like, okay, well, I need to just kind of keep this as part of my, I guess, in the back of my mind if things change. Like, is there something I can do about it? But also, I'm talking about, I guess, how our not only our gut, but our vaginal microbiome can change with the right support.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Like,
Yeah,
isn't that
you can
cool?
fully change it. It's incredible. Yeah. And how amazing that we have like a direct access to that microbiome. There's not a, like, the gut microbiome, it's got a long way for us to go.
Yeah, yeah. There's a few little
So
sphincters in there that are keeping us,
yeah,
us
yeah,
away.
yeah. So it's pretty cool that we can actually like impact and change the microbiome topically.
Yes.
Incredible.
Before we move on to, I guess, some of those treatments, Cope, I'm
Yeah.
sure people are like, tell me, what do we do? Even though, of course, we're clearly getting a picture of it's more complex than just, taking a probiotic. What is the link between the vaginal and gut microbiome? Do they talk to each other? Do they influence each other? Are they kind of separate? Yeah, what is it?
Yeah, so it's a little bit complex, but yes and no.
Yeah.
So they are separate. They're separate microbiomes. They shouldn't in a healthy individual interact too much, but they
Mhm.
absolutely can. The biggest influence would be the gut microbiome on the vaginal microbiome, and that's when there's maybe some dysbiosis in the gut microbiome, or where somehow I'm sharing fecal microbes to the vaginal microbiome, and that
Yeah.
can happen in lots of different ways. And it doesn't have to just be, anal sex is one that comes to mind, or wiping back to front, any kind of interplay between the back and the front.
Yeah.
But what can happen, and what I see most often, is things like women who give birth and they might pass feces while they're giving birth.
Yeah.
That's going to probably enter the vaginal microbiome because they're
Yeah.
just very close. They can also translocate from the colon, from the gut microbiome to the vaginal microbiome. And usually they would do that with things like wearing G-strings, and then you've got that kind of
Yeah. Rubbings and
bridge
yeah.
to the bridge to the vagina. So there's lots of different ways where we can have translocation, but that would be one of the main ways, is that we've got fecal microbes coming into the vaginal microbiome.
Mm.
But then even more systemic effects as well. If we've got dysbiosis in one microbiome, we've got immune activation, we've got inflammation, we've got things that are then going to impact the rest of the body and how we deal with overgrowths in other areas. So if people have, quite a dysbiotic gut microbiome, or they might have something like inflammatory bowel disease, or something that's really keeping the immune system on all the time,
Yeah.
that's really going to impact the vaginal microbiome as well.
Yeah. I think that makes total sense. Like when you think about literally like how close the openings of the anus and the vaginal opening is, like it's not a huge distance, and there are many reasons that there is like this movement of stuff in that area. And I guess like for people to think about, even if you did have the healthiest of gut microbiomes, we don't actually want any of those microbes coming into the vaginal. So it's not even like, oh, I've got SIBO, that's why I've got a vaginal microbiome issue. It's like, no, no, no. It's just those microbes, period, are in the wrong place. So
That's
just to kind of
right.
make that clear.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah. And those microbes behave so differently and need such a different environment, because the gut microbiome is a closed ecosystem mostly,
Yeah,
whereas the vaginal microbiome is very different in what it needs. So yeah, those microbes don't mix well together.
absolutely. Let's talk about treatments. Now, people would be like, I've been on multiple rounds of boric acid, I've been on antibiotics, I've been on antifungals. These, in many cases, are, I guess, the first types of treatments that maybe are suggested. Is
Mhm.
there a place for them? I guess like there might be, as in all medications, but why would it be that they aren't working? Do some of them do more harm than good? Again, I know this is probably a whole episode even just touching on this, but like just give us an insight.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, there's always place for those types of medications, and sometimes I'll see a bacteria where I go, yeah, we're in a place where you're pregnant or you want to be pregnant, you can't get pregnant. We want to kill those things off, and we don't have a lot of time. So sometimes we will use antibiotics. Antifungals can be useful, especially in acute infections. So if someone has acute thrush and they really don't get thrush very often, it's their first time, second time, and they use antifungals, it might go away forever for them. But if we're not dealing with all of those issues that are the reason that that thing came to be, so is there lifestyle factors? Is it your underwear? Are you drinking too much alcohol? Are we smoking?
Even the partner, by the sounds of it, like just
Partner, is
yeah,
a partner being reinfected? That's a whole nother
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Yeah, so there's lots of different factors, and if we don't address all of those and identify all of those, then it probably will come back. And a lot of those things need to be worked on either naturopathically. And then we also need to work on things like, do we need to support the immune system? Do we need to change things hormonally for you? And those things are more naturopathic in the way that we treat it, kind of root cause.
Oh, look, this makes total sense. I mean, we've heard it, and I know there's people probably like nodding their heads as they're listening to this, being like, yeah, I tried it. I keep having to go back. It's not really, the effects aren't holding. And I like it is because this environment, the drivers, the risk factors aren't being looked at, supported, addressed.
Yeah.
This is like naturopathic medicine 101 is like what actually caused the issue, not just the issue itself. And so the vaginal microbiome is yet another example of where we need to look slightly outside the vaginal microbiome to actually get the answers as to the hows and whys this actually occurred.
Yeah, exactly. And if it keeps coming back, we really need to think about, like, have you had antibiotics? How many rounds of antibiotics have you had? Do they work? Do they make it worse? And then do we have resistance to antibiotics? Have
Yeah.
those microbes just grown stronger and stronger and stronger? And now we have a really big kind of systemic issue.
Yep, yep. And thinking back to even the interview I did with Asher about the skin microbiome and the resistance that people with acne have against antibiotics, like that is a real issue. And like our microbes, particularly those bacteria, they do adapt to their exposure to antibiotics. Like they do talk to each other. So resistance is such a good thing for people to keep in mind as well. If they feel like they're smacking their head against a wall, it's, one thing to keep in mind is like maybe you're like, it's just not the right antibiotic and approach for you. So let's say they're like, I'm done with this roundabout of antibiotics and I want to be looking at something more holistic. Obviously, we're clearly treating the person and their results, but what are some probiotics, herbs, prebiotics? Like, what are some of these things that are in our little arsenal toolkit that we can be using to support our vaginal microbiome? And obviously, this is prefaced with this needs to be done under the care of a practitioner. So
Yeah.
don't start doing these things just because Greta and I have, mentioned it. So take it away. What can we use?
Yeah, so absolutely needs to be tailored to the individual, and thinking about partner treatments as well. But some common things that I would use and use a lot, and what I'm usually thinking about is not causing damage to the microbiome in terms of using really harsh antimicrobials that are going to be non-selective. So I try to use things that are more supportive of the lactobacillus species and have an antimicrobial effect. So some of those herbs would be things like pomegranate and green tea are amazing for the vaginal microbiome. You can take them orally as well, and use them intravaginally under the care of a practitioner.
Always.
Yeah. And those two things will be both prebiotic and also antimicrobial. So they're really useful. There's a lot of research around BV and green tea. Even just drinking green tea can actually be really useful for BV. For aerobic vaginitis, pomegranate has a lot of research behind it and can be a really, really good one. Also really well tolerated as well. There's lots of other different herbs, but they're all kind of lots of crazy different
Yeah.
herbs. Yeah. But yeah, there's loads of different herbs that I use. I use some herbs that I'd never heard of until a few years ago, that we didn't use at learn in uni.
Yeah, we've gone past beyond the dandelion root and the ginger. We're now
Yeah.
in like the
Yeah.
wacky world of,
The horopitos and the hotunias and the satis. Yeah. So
it
there's
sounds like a spell.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yes, there's lots of different herbs, and then we also want to think about herbs that maybe we do have some hormonally active herbs in there.
Mm.
Maybe we need some anti-inflammatory herbs like curcumin could be a good one, or working on histamine production. All of these microbes produce so much histamine. So things like your quercetins can be really useful as well, which is a nutrient that you can take to reduce histamine production. Then things like your pre and probiotics. The specific ones that we usually use for the vaginal microbiome, just supporting the lactobacillus species, would be things like lactulose, PHGG, partially hydrolyzed guar gum, can be good orally. You do need to be a little bit careful with lactulose because it can feed up some of those opportunistic
Mm.
microbes. So I'd usually only use it once where we've decreased the things that we want to decrease, or in things like BV, because it won't tend to feed those microbes. So those
Wow.
can be good. Yeah, it's very nuanced as well with the things that you can use for different microbes, which is why we want to be very specific about
We
what.
want to
Yeah.
target this stuff. You don't want to be thinking, I can grab lactulose off the shelf and, be accidentally feeding this dysbiotic community. You want to be working with someone that can interpret the landscape appropriately. And I
Yeah.
was like, as you were saying, a lot of those things, different system, but I was like, yeah, green tea, pomegranate,
Oh,
lactulose,
yeah.
PHGG. I'm like, gut, 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 gut. So this is where, from a natural medicine perspective, like there are different applications for the same treatments for different organisms for different parts of the body. Like, so if there was that gut vaginal connection that you've worked with and you identify is a factor, wouldn't it be amazing if you could be treating one at the same time? I mean, obviously it
Yeah,
depends on where you're
totally.
applicating the treatment. But yeah, I think that's always so cool when there's those connections in what we have at our disposal.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of my clients will have either the more bladder and vagina
Mm,
issues together, or gut and vagina issues, vaginal issues together. So we're usually treating both at the same time.
yeah.
And the beauty is that you can do those same herbs and those same treatments orally, and you'll target both places. I do use a lot of intravaginal treatment, so topical treatment on the vulva and into the vagina, and that's going to be a bit more targeted. So it really depends on the person, what works best for them.
Yeah, because that was like my next, like that was kind of, I guess, what people think, like, how do we take these treatments? So there
Yeah.
are times where you can say, right, well, we want a bit more of a systemic effect. So maybe we're using oral versus, well, this is clearly needs to be very targeted. So we have to go intravaginally. So I guess like you're saying that, and for probiotics, like
Mm.
there's research that there's some probiotics that can make their way through to the vagina when you take them orally. Is that what you're seeing, or is it just
Yeah.
depending on the circumstance?
Really depends on the circumstance. I definitely find that with probiotics, especially, and there's not a lot of probiotics out there that are labeled for intravaginal use or used
Mm,
as a pessary.
mm,
But naturopathically, we do insert a lot of probiotics into the vagina, and it really is just the most direct way to have that effect. It has to make a really long journey through through the stomach, survive the stomach acid, go down to the gut, have its effect in the gut, and then be pooped out to
yeah.
make it across the perineum and into the vaginal microbiome. So it's a really treacherous journey for them. So it can be pretty tricky to get the kind of levels that we want to see from the oral route. So going intravaginal can just be a lot easier. And there's different strains that will work better intravaginally, and different strains that will work better orally. Sometimes we're taking a probiotic because we want it to have the immune effects and the
Yes.
anti-inflammatory effects. So we might take some strains orally and then some strains intravaginally.
Again, it's just all about that personalized prescription. But that makes total sense. Like taking it orally, if you want it to be used locally, could be like the scenic route. And you're just like, we
Absolutely
need
scenic, right?
seeing it all, and you're like, we don't even need to be here. Like we
Yeah,
just need,
yeah,
yeah, that makes
yeah.
total sense.
That's such a good
Um,
way to put it. Yeah.
treacherous journey was also good too.
Yeah, yeah. It just takes a long time to see the effects. Whereas, with oral, with taking them orally, in 3 to 6 months until we see a change to the vaginal microbiome even slightly. So
Oof,
yeah,
no
it
one's
would
got time for that.
vaginally 10 days plus.
Yeah, yeah. I think most people will be like, sooner results, please. Like, we can work on, systemic immune stuff at the same time. Can we, please? Because they want
Perfect.
those
Yeah.
results, of course. Some hot topics. So I feel like we've kind of been touching on these, but Candida. So is it overdiagnosed, misdiagnosed? Like, I guess, yeah, how common is it really?
Yeah, it's definitely not as common as we think it is. It's much more common than what people think it is in the gut microbiome. So no, everyone thinks they have thrush in the gut, and it's often not the case. But
Mm.
in the vaginal microbiome, it's really commonly misdiagnosed and especially self-diagnosed.
Yes.
And I totally understand why, because I remember, the only thing that I spoke about with my mum was thrush. It's the only vaginal infection I'd ever heard of.
Yeah.
And I'm sure a lot of people are the same. So we feel something down there and we go, it's thrush. I've got thrush. And we just don't really have the words or the knowledge for identifying the other types of infections. I think it's important just to understand the differences and that it can be a little bit detrimental if we're treating things as thrush and it's actually something else. So, something that I see really commonly be misdiagnosed as thrush is aerobic vaginitis. So,
Mm.
AV has very similar symptoms. You'll usually get that itchiness and irritation. It's a very irritated kind of infection, and you do get a thick white discharge. The difference is that it's smooth. So the smooth, thick white discharge is more seen in AV, and then with thrush, it's more usually that chunky kind of cottage cheese discharge.
Mm.
So that one is very commonly misdiagnosed as thrush, and I'll see women who have had months of fluconazole or they're self-treating with Canesten every 2 weeks,
Yeah.
like that, and it's just not getting any better. So that's probably one of the most misdiagnosed things. I think there's a lot more education and awareness around BV now. So we sort of talk about it a bit more.
Yeah.
There's more over-the-counter things available for BV, and we know that it's a fishy smell and it's a watery discharge, and there's a few differences. But I think anything that doesn't fit those two molds, people go, it's thrush.
Yeah, look, and again, it makes sense if you don't know that there's such thing as, yeah, aerobic or anaerobic and all these things, like why would you be thinking it's not thrush? The right and wrong way to clean ourselves, because like I've always thought of, and as I was told, don't even know when, that our vagina is like this self-cleaning oven. So that's how I kind of see it, but I know that there like is a lot of products out there for cleaning. There's different cultures, there's obviously different personal preferences. So I guess in terms of cleaning ourselves, are we causing more harm than good, depending on what we're doing?
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. So, in an ideal world, if we've got a really healthy vaginal microbiome that is dominant in lactobacillus species, it is self-cleaning because it's producing that lactic acid. It's able to break down the, bacteria and the bacterial biofilms, and keep things nice and acidic. If we don't have that environment, we might need a little bit of a helping hand. The ideal is that we can just wash with water, and that should be enough for most people. I do use a couple of washes, but I use them as a prescription, and it's not something that you want to use all the time because I've had thrush a few times, and so now I always use this wash,
Yeah.
because that will come into the over cleaning, and that might disrupt things further. So the other thing to be wary of with those products, and I'm thinking about a few that you can get readily available at the supermarket.
Mm.
A lot of those will be absolute rubbish, and it's not just because of that they're quite harsh chemicals, but they also include things in there that we don't want absorbed into that really
That
sensitive
can be perfumed and different,
fumes.
yeah, all that kind of stuff.
Lots of crappy stuff in there. Yep. And not all of them will be pH balanced for the vagina as well. We hope they are as an intimate product, but they're not always.
Yeah.
And it depends what we want to achieve. So sometimes I will use some, we mentioned boric acid before. I might use a boric acid wash just for a short period of time if we need to break down some biofilms or change the pH. So that can be useful. And then things like if we want to put some antifungal herbs in a wash or something like that, that might be useful as well.
Yeah. That's clearly very different to going to your local Coles and being like, I need
Yeah,
an intimate wash. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to highlight is that
yeah,
with the best intentions, we get it. Like there's
yeah.
clearly issues that you aren't being supported with, as your story attests to.
Mhm.
But it would be just such a shame if in your journey to try to support yourself, you're causing more imbalances. So I
Yeah.
guess like understanding that like a wash that you might be prescribed, a individual herbal wash is very different to that.
Yeah, yeah. And I'd say I'd never recommend getting intimate washes from the supermarket.
Mm.
They're not specific for anything that you need it to do. And they
Yeah.
are just pretty harsh in terms of wiping out lots of those microbes that we actually need for protection. If we're using anything that's like antimicrobial, that's not a really selective antimicrobial as well. And so sometimes those washes will have like tea tree or something like that in them.
Mm.
That's obviously natural. They also have some more harsh chemicals, but we're going to wipe out the whole microbiome,
Yeah.
and
And
that's going to cause a lot more issues.
and I think like this just makes me think about our other microbiomes. We think about our skin microbiome. We think about gut microbiome. Like if you're doing
Yeah.
colonics and those types of things like every day, you're washing things out. So like our microbiome, for the most part, doesn't want to be super sterile and clean. Like it does want space to kind of be doing its
Yeah.
thing without
Like
constantly needing
feels.
to be like, I'm getting cleaned out again,
Yeah.
like so
Yeah.
that's like just a great rule for all of our microbiomes. We don't want to over clean anything. That's just it's not what it wants.
Yeah. They have a role to play. So they're actually important to stay there. And they are bacteria, they are fungi, they are things that you might want to wash away, but it's actually playing a really, really important role there.
Yeah, absolutely. If you could give like I guess if someone's out there going like something funny is going on and if they're like I just need to do something today for myself, like what would your thing where you're like what's your today action someone could do
Yeah.
that could really kind of start their journey or they feel like they're making yeah, I guess making a start on trying to get a diagnosis or even just looking after themselves.
Yeah, I think if you suspect that something is quite off, and especially if you're experiencing any of those more severe symptoms, if it's a today thing, book a GP appointment or book an appointment with a naturopath who really specializes in that area and is going to understand the next steps for you. I think there's not really a blanket thing that everyone can do right now.
Yeah.
But get the support, get someone on your health team who really, really understands and can actually support you through the diagnosis process.
Mm.
You can, if as a first step, you can order something like the Juno biotest. What I'd say is that it does come with a report and you can have a one-on-one call with them. It's not going to be super targeted to you, but it is something that you can do today, and then you can present that to your naturopath.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
great thing. Is like even if you're like, I want to get testing done now, it may
yeah,
be like, I will get this in the works, but I will be making an appointment. Like that's a
yeah,
proactive step.
yeah.
And I guess like from your clinical and your personal journey, if you
Mm.
had to pick, and this may be the same piece of advice, but if you had to pick like your number one piece of advice for someone working with an issue related to their vagina and their microbiome, like what
Mm.
would it be? Like what would you be like, God, I wish I knew this years ago when I started.
Yeah, then there's maybe a couple of things.
Okay, give us more than one. We
Yeah.
love that.
One, and this is sort of more blanket to everyone
Yep,
having any
yep.
issues with vaginal health. One is invest in some really good breathable natural
Oh,
underwear.
that sounds
So
good.
organic bamboo is by far the most breathable. It's somewhere between 4 and 10, depending who you ask, times more breathable than organic cotton. So it's really, really supportive. And I've had a lot of clients who just make that change and say, "Oh, I feel so much better."
Wow.
Just a tiny thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it could be that. It also could be changing your diet, looking at if there is anything in your diet, like are you having more than 2 drinks every weekend? Is there something that might be causing some tissue damage for you that you could change right now?
Mm. They're great. Like I think, and because I was even thinking, like, damn, we didn't touch on underwear, but we were leaving like
Underwear.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
You're like, no, 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 it's coming. Because I think, like, we spoke about G-strings, which I'm like, oh, no, thank you. But like, and people just been like, great, bamboo, what I guess, a simple step which could have significant influences on that whole area, that breathability for everything that you said, like why it needs to breathe and everything. They're great tips for people. And that could be also a today tip. Go out and get yourself
Yeah.
some
Go change your
breathable,
underwear.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Overhaul your wardrobe. Clearly you are just got so much more to share. So if people are like, I need to work with Greta, how do they do that? How do they connect with you?
Yeah, so they can find me on Instagram. It's just greta.naturopathy. You can also find me on my website, which is gretanaturopathy.com. And there's a little button there that you can reach out and write me an email, or you can book a discovery call or an appointment straight through the website as well.
And we'll definitely have all those links there. So people can just like scroll down to the show notes, click away, and they can connect with you because, yeah, you're clearly very good at what you do. And I know that there's going to be people be out there that are just listening to this thinking, wow, never heard this before. This is exciting. This is the new hope that they've been waiting for. So I just wanted to thank you for being so generous with your time and your information. It's been such a good chat.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. We've gone way over time.
We always do. Thanks so much, Greta.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into Gutsy Talks. I hope today's episode left you feeling inspired to take the next step in your gut health journey. If you're ready to dive deeper, head over to rachellarson.com.au. There's a range of courses and resources waiting for you. If you loved this episode, I'd be so grateful if you shared it with others who might benefit from this information. And so you don't miss out on future Gutsy Talks, be sure to hit follow and leave a review. I'd love to hear your feedback. I'm Rachel Larson, and I can't wait to connect with you again for our next Gutsy Talk.